Today we're going to get into an important topic in project management, and that is the difference between effort and duration. And there is a difference, and it matters. And oftentimes I see projects or project managers confuse them and effort, which is work hours, the amount of time it takes to do the work, with duration, which is actually the elapsed time that passes while that work is being done. And it matters when it comes to planning and schedule and cost and even resources, and I'll talk about why. Because the misunderstanding leads to inaccurate schedules, unrealistic expectations, and blown budgets. So clarifying them really helps the teams to plan smarter and avoid those surprises. So let's talk about the definition, and I'll give you a real example. So as I mentioned, effort is the total amount of time spent working. So let's say we have an activity that takes 40 hours of effort to do, right? The team has estimated, yep, it'll take 40 hours. The duration is the calendar time it takes to finish. And so for example, if that activity takes 40 hours and I have a full-time resource, right, that's working 8 hours a day, and it's the only thing they're working on, they'll get it done in 5 days, right, in a week. If I have a resource that's half time, they'll get it done in 10 days, right? Because they're only putting in 4 hours a day, and therefore it takes 10 days to finish. But the implications are on the schedule, right? Because if somebody says it takes 40 hours and I just assume that they're full time and I commit to a deadline that's a week away when in fact it's 2 weeks away, that's a missed expectation. And it's the same thing for cost. So we pay for the resource that's working on the project, right? So if I assume that the resource is only working for 1 week, but they're working for 2 weeks, I might have to pay the cost for the entire 2 weeks, and now the cost for them has essentially doubled. And so why it matters, I talked about estimation. We need to accurately clarify how much work is truly required. And then the scheduling is the timelines and dependencies as a result of the duration and the effort, right? And the resources working on it. So it helps you manage your expectations of when am I going to finish the work? Is it the week or is it the 2 weeks? As I mentioned, the effort drives labor cost and the duration affects the overhead and the resource allocation. And so, again, using that example, if my cost assumed a week's worth of the team, but in fact I now need 2 weeks, it's not just the resource, it might be the project manager or some of the other resources whose cost is also extending. And that misalignment can cause the overruns in both the time and the budget. And so here's some things to think about. You want to separate the effort estimate from duration forecasts. So you can ask people how long it takes to do something or how much effort it takes to do something, but also ask them how long. And you want to factor in their availability. Well, are you working on this full time or part time? Do you have other things? And we won't even get into the fact that the math generally doesn't work the same, that a half-time resource takes twice as long because generally they're working on other things and they're distracted. So I would actually argue sometimes it takes longer than that if they're a part-time resource, but that we'll save that for a different conversation. But the forecast resource is based on duration. This is probably the most important tip I can give you. When you do budgets and estimates, you want to estimate resource times duration times cost. How long are you holding on to the resources? Because in an example where maybe the person has 36 hours worth of work to do in a week, you still might pay for them to be 40. And so if you only estimate based on effort, you're going to miss that time where maybe they're not as productive or, again, they're still sitting there and you're paying for them. You want to account for the dependencies. So if you're waiting on an approval, that's a perfect example where there's zero effort but a lot of duration, right? And that happens all the time in our projects. So for budget, you want to estimate based on resources, and for schedule, you want to estimate based on duration. And you can use tools that lay all this out. Most good project management tools have that. And then once you've figured that out, obviously you want to manage expectations with stakeholders. So here's the summary. As I mentioned, effort is work hours, duration is elapsed time, and both are critical, but you have to recognize that there's a difference and plan accordingly so that your estimates, your schedule, and your budgets all take into account the factors that we talked about. And then always ask, right, how much effort and how long will it take? And hopefully the duration of this presentation was well worth the effort of you watching it. Thanks.